Hello and welcome to the Heat Check podcast, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat podcast. I'm David Wilson, and I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chiang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, what's up?
There isn't much going on, David.
We're going to do a lot of summer league talk today.
Yeah.
Jovic, is he a bust? Pat lost his fastball.
Blow up the summer league team, 0-2.
Honestly, we're recording this on Tuesday. They'll actually play again this afternoon. Maybe I'll be able to catch a few minutes of it. Honestly, I have not watched a second of summer league. I'm kind of like I'm strictly a Vegas summer league guy. I don't need any California Classic. Is that what this is called? California Classic?
California Classic, yes.
Obviously, Anthony is not there. He'll be out in Vegas by the time everyone's listening to this, getting ready for the real summer league. But in all seriousness, there is a lot to get to this week, although a lot for the Heat, it's kind of a whole lot of nothing, and the story is the nothing so far. Obviously, PJ Tucker is gone. Victor Oladipo and Dewayne Dedmon are back. That's pretty much all the Heat adjacent moves that have happened so far, right? I'm not missing.
No, that's it. They signed Nikola Jovic to his rookie contract.
Right, signed Nikola Jovic, but none of their free agents have gone elsewhere, and they've not signed any other free agents other than, like we said, PJ and Vic and Dedmon. There's a big 7-foot, very slender reason for that. I think maybe also I don't know, a 6'1" reason for that potentially. Also, I don't know how tall Donovan Mitchell is, but obviously Utah traded Rudy Gobert, and I think there's been reporting that they're not intending to trade Donovan Mitchell, but I don't know, once you kind of start blowing it up, you tend to blow it up all the way. So I think that name is going to be out there for a long time this offseason too. I don't know, I'll let you get your Jovic thoughts out at the end of this episode, but let's start with free agency. It's a holding pattern, and I think we both agree it's all because of Kevin Durant, basically, right?
Yeah. I mean, whenever you think you have a shot at Durant, you got to take it, right? Even if it means watching TJ Warren and all these forward options come off the board. If the Heat strike out, which I would say is probably more likely than not, right, at this point, chances, I mean, I think they have a shot, and they must think they have a shot to be waiting into day 6 of free agency between, from making any significant moves or addressing the hole at power forward. If they really didn't think they have a shot at Kevin, they would have filled that need already. And Caleb Martin, probably his situation would be resolved as well. But we're standing here on Tuesday as we record this on day 6, really with no Heat activity from the outside since Thursday night. And it is pretty much all because of Kevin Durant. And I get it. I think I agree with the risk they're taking. If they don't get Durant, they're probably going to take a step back. They're probably not going to be as good as last year because, I mean, TJ Warren signed with the Nets today, I think, on a 1-year deal. Obviously, Caleb Martin is out there. He could address the need you have at power forward, but Caleb Martin was on the team last year. How are you kind of replacing the PJ Tucker's roster spot?
Right, that's the question.
There's Blake Griffin, there's Carmelo Anthony, there's, I guess, Markieff Morris might be actually makes sense at this point because he's a 4 who could shoot a little bit, could defend multiple positions. Maybe he's the guy you bring back along with Caleb. But again, if they don't get Kevin, they're not going to be, unless they make another trade, they're not going to be as good as they were last year, at least roster wise when you kind of grade the roster. So, but that's a risk they're taking, and I get it. I think you gotta go for the whale. You don't have many chances at talent like Kevin Durant. They're not available much. So I totally understand why they're kind of putting everything on hold for that.
Yeah, and I think even more important than the fact that the roster might not be as good, because I'm they could be, this roster could be better than it was last year if assuming Jimmy is as good as doesn't take that step, you get the little internal improvement from Bam and Tyler. This team could be just as good as last year. Bigger issue is the Celtics went out and got Malcolm Brogdon.
Yeah.
The Bucks, they've got
Joe Ingles.
They added Joe Ingles, who will be out for most of the season. But
Philly got PJ.
Philly got PJ. The Hawks got DeJounte Murray.
Right.
So a lot of their peers in the East aside from the Nets, who are kind of a mess, have found ways to improve. But that's a big concern.
But would you? I still think, and I wrote this in my mailbag. If you want to read it at MiamiHerald.com this weekend, I'll put in that plug. I still think, even if they don't Kevin Durant and they just re-sign Caleb and they bring back a veteran, they sign a veteran that's available in free agency at forward, the core of Tyler, Kyle, Bam, and Jimmy, still a top 4 team in the East.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we said
wouldn't be
out of the playoffs, right? There was a three teams. Maybe the Sixers are up in that top 4 now. But there's a clear cut top 4, I think, in the East.
Right. So if that's the worst case scenario, like, again, I think you take that risk. You either stay at your worst case scenario is you stay at top 4 team in the East. You're in the conversation for winning the conference, or at least getting definitely home court in the first round if you stay healthy, or you get Kevin Durant and you're maybe the favorite to win the championship.
Yeah.
So it's totally understandable what they're doing. I'm more interested in what happens, I guess, after the whole Kevin Durant thing is resolved. If the Heat don't get him, right? You could say that he could trade Duncan, a first-round pick, for Harrison Barnes, or some of the other guys who've been talking about expiring deals. But I would say, and tell me if you agree with this, David, like, if I'm the Heat, I don't trade any assets for a guy like Harrison Barnes, as much as he would maybe bring you up, maybe be a kind of a wash with PJ and he'd help fill that spot. I wouldn't do it, because what if Donovan Mitchell requests a trade in 3 months?
Right.
And you traded a first-round pick that you need to get a deal done for a star, or Duncan, whose salary you need for salary matching purposes, for Harrison Barnes. I don't think I would take that chance. I would just kind of sign who you need to sign in free agency and move forward and keep your assets for the next guy who becomes available, because there's always going to be a next guy. We know that. So I mean, I'm interested to see if the Heat really do like to say, okay, that's it. We're gonna trade one of our picks and Duncan for Harrison Barnes, or for, I don't know, John Collins, or some of the other guys. Jay Crowder, right, has been a name that's been floated out there. If I'm the Heat, I don't think I'd do any of that, because you need to keep as many picks as possible open for the next star who becomes available.
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with you. I know, like, naturally, it's not just Heat fans, not just NBA fans. We live in a world where, like, there's just an insatiable thirst for news, basically, right? It's the way, like, social media has poisoned all of our brains. Is like, no news in everyone's mind is bad news.
Right.
Where, I think the long history of the NBA bucks against that notion. No news, patience is kind of historically the most important, rather than you think back to after the 30-11, right? And they went and spent all that money to keep, like, I know they weren't upgrading that year, but they were like, we got it. Like, we've got something. We got to make moves. We got to give all this money out. And obviously it's the one kind of dark spot the Heat have had in the last 30 years, essentially. Like, the Heat know they have something good. They know that if they run it back, they'll be pretty good. I think they probably know probably not going to win a championship if they run it back, but I don't think their plan is to run it back. I think whether it's Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell, or if both of those fail, if neither of those come through, then there's a move to make. But I don't think there's any rush right now. Because, again, if you don't get Kevin Durant, let's say Kevin Durant gets traded this offseason, which I don't even think that's a guarantee right now.
Yeah.
Kevin Durant gets traded this offseason, that sets off another domino. What happens to Kyrie? Or who does Kevin Durant get traded to? What does that team need to make a move? You don't want to spend money just for the sake of spending money. And I think the Heat are in a good position where they don't need to do that. That 30-11 team, they kind of needed to spend money because they're kind of hopeless for a little bit there, right? There was no Jimmy Butler on the roster. There was no clear indication that this team was going to quickly be a contender. This Heat team, if they don't do anything, they're going to be a contender. We've seen it now across the last 3 seasons. I don't think there's a clear superpower right now. Maybe wherever Kevin Durant goes becomes that clear favorite. And, it's going to be tougher, I think, this year than it was last year, because you're going to have the Clippers will be back. Like I said, the Sixers look like they're going to be better. There's 4 good teams in the East. The Celtics probably improved by getting Brogdon. But I think no matter what, the Heat are going to be pretty good next year. Very good next year.
Sure.
And when you're this good, you're trying to get the move that gets you to championship level, because marginal upgrades are nice, but the big what's the marginal upgrade between being the second best team in, like, if you get Harrison Barnes, this team goes from being, let's say they're the second best team in the East because that's where they finished last year. They go from being the second best team in the East to
second best team
probably being the second best team in the
Yeah.
East. Like,
Yeah.
you're trying to get that. You're better. You're closer. The gap is probably a little closer.
Right.
But you're really trying to become the best team in the East, best team in the league. And Kevin Durant does that for you. Donovan Mitchell does that for you. Who knows who else is going to become available. I still would not touch Kyrie with a 10-foot pole if I'm the Heat. But
Bradley Beal, I mean,
maybe Bradley Beal by mid-season, it's going really bad. And all of a sudden, and by the way, his value is probably a little bit easier to get him than it was 2 years ago when these Bradley Beal rumors first popped up, because that contract is kind of onerous. Like, you're probably not being the Wizards at some point are going to want to get off that deal, probably. Like, there are options out there. I'm not panicking about the Heat's offseason until the trade deadline. Is kind of where I'm at.
That's the thing, right? Like, I know Heat fans are going to panic in like 2 weeks. Let's say if Kevin Durant's in Phoenix and the Heat just re-signed Caleb and signed, I don't know, Blake Griffin, let's say, like, people are going to panic and be like, oh, this team is going to step back. How could they wait? How could they wait out Durant? It cost them, upgrading the roster. They lost PJ. They didn't really address the need. But there's so much that can happen between now and February, right? Like, it's not about what your roster looks like right now. It's about what your roster looks like.
Yeah, again, what the roster looks like right now is good enough to have you probably in the top 4 by the trade deadline. That's where you need to be.
That's where you need to be, right? And then you're still in position. You still have the assets available to make a move for a guy if someone becomes available, if a star becomes available. And that's really all you can do. And I think that's what the Heat, they're not trying to be hard capped, right? So they're not using the biggest exception because they want to keep that flexibility to act on the trade market, And you see they unlock picks in that deal with Oklahoma City at the trade deadline this year.
Right.
They sent KZ over there because it opened up, it increased their flexibility as well in the trade market. So you kind of see what the Heat is thinking at this moment. Like, they know they need to get better, right? And they want to make a big move. They don't know what that big move is going to be. I'm sure they didn't know Kevin Durant was going to be available a month ago, right? I don't know if anybody did. Yeah. But they're in position to be in conversation, and that's all you can ask for as a fan, I think, and as an executive. Like, you want to be able to say, we can get this done. We have the chance to get this done because we have the necessary assets available to do it. Now, if you want to talk about trade offers, David, like, I guess the first question is, would you be willing to include, not both, because I think both of us would agree we wouldn't include both Bam and Jimmy into a trade for Kevin Durant, but would you be willing to include one of those guys in a trade for Kevin Durant?
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time imagining they would trade Jimmy Butler.
Like, karma-wise, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And, like, I don't know, like, Jimmy and Kevin Durant, like, that is the, like, when we talk about marginal upgrades, Kevin Durant for Jimmy Butler is more than a marginal upgrade, right? You're probably the favorite in the East, but, like, like, you're going from what I think we agree, Jimmy's like the 9th or 10th best player in the league to the 2nd or 3rd best player in the league, basically. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, somewhere around there. Like, that's a big deal, but I mean, if you can swap Bam for him, and again, we're both really high on Bam. Obviously, he is kind of the future of this team. The reason you keep Bam is because you think Bam is not just the perfect complementary piece right now as you chase a championship, but the building block that keeps you as a contender for 10 years. But Bam is something like the 25th best player in the league, right? Like, you can upgrade that into Kevin Durant. I mean, that's a no-brainer to me. And obviously, it's complicated because of this rookie exception rule that everyone seemed to find out about. I think from Bobby Marks. Yeah, when Bobby Marks put it out there. Yeah. It is that makes it complicated. Ben Simmons would have to be involved in the trade in some capacity, whether the Heat get him back in the deal or he goes elsewhere, or Bam goes elsewhere and it's a 3-team deal.
There's ways around it. It just complicates it.
But I would have a hard time doing it with Jimmy. Partially, it's like the sentimentality part of it, like you said, the karma part of it, and just the fact that you put you put Jimmy and Kevin Durant together, and you're probably the favorite to win the championship. Whereas I think if you have Bam and Kevin together, maybe the championship, but it's not as like you're not as clear cut above Golden State or whoever it might be. So I would part with Bam, I think, no doubt. And again, that's like no disrespect to Bam. I think Bam is like, obviously he's on track to be one of the great players in Heat history, and there would obviously be some sentimentality there too. They all expect his name's going to be up in the rafters. He's going to be a Heat lifer, all that kind of stuff. The heir to Udonis Haslem in some ways, right? Like, but I don't know, when you can get Kevin Durant, like if you have Kevin Durant and Jimmy Butler together for the next 3 years or whatever, I don't know what exactly how much is left on Jimmy's deal. You're gonna win a championship in all likelihood.
Yeah, you're going to be definitely in a title conversation each of those 3 years if those guys are healthy. I have to think that the Heat are, and this is not news, but I have to think that the Heat are trying to get this done without trading.
Bam. Oh yeah, certainly.
I think that's the priority.
And again, part of it is how it complicates it if Bam.
It complicates it. Yeah, and that's what makes it tough for the Heat.
If you have Bam, Jimmy, and Kevin Durant,
I mean, you could argue that big three is very comparable to the Heat's previous big three. I think. I mean, I don't think that's crazy, like to say. Like, Dwayne Wade, Bosh, and LeBron were obviously
they're probably all a little bit worse than the big three were at the time. Although by the end of the big three, Dwayne was kind of breaking down a little bit. But
I mean, Bam is pretty comparable to Grizz Bosh. I know offensively he's not as good, but
and Kevin is, obviously LeBron at that point was probably as good as anyone has ever been in basketball. But Kevin Durant is, we're talking about 2 of the 15 best players of all time.
Yeah. And but I want to talk about that scenario, right? Like, so if the Heat are really trying to keep Bam and Jimmy, I don't know. To answer my own question, I don't know if I would trade Bam for KD because of the age factor. I know you're going all in now, but I just don't know what would that group look like as far as a post presence if we trade Bam. Like, is Omer Yurtseven the center? Is Dwayne Dedmon the
some guys like
center?
I guess if Bam's in the deal, then you probably get to keep Garrett, but
but so let's say they try to keep Bam and Jimmy. Can they come up with a package good enough to entice the Nets into a trade? It probably is going to take a third or fourth team to include more assets in the deal that goes to Brooklyn to make it a big enough offer for Brooklyn to even consider it. But if it's a straight 2-team trade, a package of Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, 3 first-round picks if you can amend the protections on the pick you still OKC, which I think is possible. I think they could do that. And then 3 pick swaps is probably the best they could do. And then maybe a couple young, if they want like a Gabe Vincent or an Omer Yurtseven as a filler, but as a upside player on a minimum contract, you could throw them in there as well. But that's probably the best they can do. Is it, on the face of it, it's like that's for Kevin Durant, that's not nearly enough. But I think everything comes down to how much leverage does KD really have in this, right? Like, I know he has 4 years left on his deal, but he still has leverage. Like, Cleveland can make an offer for Kevin Durant, and Kevin Durant could back channel say, I'm not playing for you. You could trade Garland and Mobley for me if you want, and all your young assets and picks, but you're going to trade for me, and you're going to get someone who's not happy and is not going to want to play. Mm-hmm. So that's going to scare teams away. So is Phoenix, are Phoenix and Miami the only 2 teams on his list? So far, that's all we know, right? Those are the 2 teams that have come out. If that's the case, Miami's really only competition is Phoenix.
Yeah.
And so maybe surprisingly, the Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry, Dr. Robinson package is enough with 3 picks, 3 pick swaps, and maybe he get a third team in there and get another pick to Brooklyn. Maybe that is enough. But I think the missing puzzle piece in all this is, are Phoenix and Miami really the only 2 teams Kevin Durant would consider playing for? Because that means a lot, and that would change a lot of kind of thinking of what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, I think it's also not just, are those the only 2 teams he would play for, or he would whatever he wants to play for would go 100% for. It's a question of, what do the other teams think? Does Cleveland, like you said, Cleveland, Cleveland think, sure, he doesn't want to play for us now, but we trade for him, he gets to play with Darius Garland, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, this is kind of fun to play with all these young guys. Toronto is another team that's kind of been brought up a lot. It's very similar to, obviously, the gamble Masai took trading for Kawhi. Obviously, that was a 1-year deal, so it was a little bit different. But, when Kawhi got traded to Toronto, I think there was a overarching consensus around the NBA of is he even going to play, right? At that point, it was all about he wanted to play in LA. Was he going to be kind of the pro? Obviously, we didn't have the Ben Simmons corollary yet, but there was the idea, like, is this going to work? It was a total gamble. Could they do the same thing with Kevin Durant? Could New Orleans is another name that's been out there a lot. And you get Kevin Durant in a building with Zion, like, is he all of a sudden going to be like, oh, wow, like,
yeah,
we're going to be a contender here for like 4 years and I can be the guy here. Like, there's going to be teams all across the NBA that I think, even if right now he doesn't think he wants to play for them, and maybe he never will, there are going to be teams, maybe Brooklyn included, that think if he's on the roster at the start of training camp and he shows up with all these guys we have, and Kevin Durant, he's not going to sit out with 4 years left on his deal, I don't think, right? I don't think there's that. Maybe he will. That would be obviously like unprecedented and go fly in the face of everything Kevin Durant like proclaims to stand for and be about.
I mean, Ben Simmons just did it pretty much.
Yeah.
But it'd be different for like
but he's
Kevin Durant's
Ben Simmons, and we're talking about Kevin Durant and a guy all about, all he ever talks about, all I care about is ball, like all that stuff. There's going to be teams across the league who I think are going to take that gamble, because worst case, you have Kevin Durant with 3 years left on his contract, so you can trade him somewhere else.
You can trade him for a bunch of assets yourself, right? Exactly. No, it is true, but it is a deterrent, right? Like,
no, it definitely is.
Like, yeah, I'm sure
a team like Minnesota, if they thought that they had a chance to get Kevin Durant, I don't think they're making that Rudy Gobert trade, obviously, right? Like, there are some teams out there that just, when he puts the word out there that he's got a list, or he's got preferences, there's 10 teams or whatever across the league, they're just crossing they're like, not worth the headache, not worth
the risk of trading young assets for a guy who doesn't want to be here. Like
Atlanta, really same way. Although that obviously that trade happened before, but still, like, if they had an inkling by then, I'm sure there was an inkling that Kevin Durant might be available across the league. Like, they're not making that trade if they think they can get him. Like, there's teams that are crossing their names off the list.
Right. You're like, Minnesota's not trading Anthony Edwards for the chance of Kevin Durant maybe playing for you and being happy. Like, that's one of the best young assets in the NBA. You're not just giving away even though it's Kevin Durant, for a guy who doesn't want to play for you, right? So it really controls a lot of the conversation of what's his thinking behind the scenes, and that's really what we don't know. I think it's interesting that really not much has leaked out over the past week, ever since the trade demand. Not much has leaked out. They're really keeping it close to the vest. There was a report yesterday, I think, from the New York Post, I believe. I hope I'm saying this right. And Brian Lewis, who said that the Nets have kind of relayed to teams that they're willing to take this into training camp, if they don't get the offer. Which is, that's the other question. How long is he willing to wait, right? How long can they wait? I guess if they tell Caleb, look, we're gonna take care of you, but we need to take care of this first. Maybe that's something that's said. I don't know. But Caleb. And he's a restricted free agent, so that gives the Heat some more time, right?
Right. Whenever he agrees with someone, but they have a week, I think, to match. Is that right? Or
it's a 2-day clock that starts.
2-day clock.
He hasn't. We know he hasn't sent an offer sheet with anybody, but it would start tomorrow, basically, if he agreed with a team today or Wednesday. It would start Wednesday afternoon when the moratorium is lifted. Right. So they have based until at least Friday to make a decision on Caleb. So that buys them more time, right? But how long is he willing to wait? They have 12 guys on the roster, so the roster is almost full. Udonis, if he comes back, is 13. Caleb, if they can get him back, is 14. So I guess they could say, well, our roster's pretty much done, but we're just waiting to see what happens with Kevin Durant. If that doesn't work, then we bring back Caleb. Udonis is 14, and you sign a 15th player. But at some point, the Heat are going to have a deadline of, okay, we're not going to wait another week. We got to resolve this with Caleb. We can't wait much longer. He's going to sign with another team. And they have to know what the roster is going to look like to move forward. So, I don't know the answer to that question because this could drag on for a while. But the Heat must have a better feel for maybe how long this could take and if it's possible that this could get done in the coming days.
So just quick explainer, how would the re-signing Caleb complicate a Kevin Durant trade?
I don't think it really would. Because they're over the cap anyway, right?
Right.
So they right now you would think they would all they have to offer him is a $6.5 million taxpayer exception because they don't want to go to the $10.5 million exception because it would set the hard cap as we just kind of talked about. Right. But I guess theoretically the conversation that could be having with Caleb is if we trade for KD, right? And we don't need the flexibility now under the hard cap because we made the big trade. And if they have enough room under the hard cap, they could say, just wait. If we can get this trade done, we'll give you $8 million, and we'll use the bigger exception because we don't care about the hard cap anymore. We have already made the trade, and we have enough room. We have enough room to get this done. So maybe that's why Caleb is willing to wait. I don't know. But if KD, they don't get KD, then I would think they would just use the exception at 6.5 million, at least a portion of it, or maybe all of it, to bring Caleb back.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, if Caleb receives an offer for more than that, then
right. So the complication here would be, I think Minnesota has been a rumored destination maybe for the Martin twins. Like if they offered $8 million, the Heat are just kind of stuck.
Yeah, like Cody just agreed to come back to the Hornets. Cody Martin, his twin brother, for 4 years, $32 million. So about $8 million a year.
Yeah.
Obviously, if the Heat use a $6.5 million exception, they can't offer that big of a deal. I think it was it's like three. I think they can offer like 3 years, $21 million to Caleb, like the biggest contract they could offer him using that exception, which seems fair for him, right? I think 3 years, $21 million is like a good number for him. But and also I think a factor is, what is the roster going to look like if we have to trade for
Mr.
Kevin Durant?
No idea what your needs become.
Yeah. Like maybe all of a sudden you don't need Caleb Martin anymore, and you're trying to sign a center or like anybody. So it's just so many variables in play that they have the luxury of waiting on Caleb because again he's a restricted free agent, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think the other like part of this, I kind of mentioned it toward the top, but like everything feels like it's waiting on a Kevin Durant trade. Everything across the league to an extent, right? So the Kevin Durant trade happens. Maybe that spurs the Donovan Mitchell trade. And maybe that spurs, right now, Brooklyn is not rebuilding yet. But they might soon be. If they trade Kevin Durant and Kyrie, they're going to try to unload guys. Utah, whenever they trade Donovan Mitchell, they're going to try to unload guys. Like all of a sudden, there's going to be more names available, right? These teams that are Victor Wembanyama is inspiring the tankathon in a way I don't think we've seen a guy do it since. I don't even remember. Like I don't even remember. Did Zion inspire? I don't remember teams really like tanking hard for Zion. But maybe
Ben Simmons a little bit. I guess.
Yeah, well, that was just because it was Philly doing it, right? Like, I'm just looking at some of these guys on these teams' rosters, and obviously, like Brooklyn, if they trade with the Heat, there could be other names, like, would Joe Harris be part of the deal? Like, there's just guys out there that might end up being part of the trade package. But like, I look at Utah and like Bojan Bogdanovic is in the last year of his deal. I've always been a big Bojan Bogdanovic fan. Rudy Gay kind of fits that same type. He's the guy we've talked about for the Heat. It feels like forever on this podcast. Yeah. He has 2 years left on his deal with a player option in the second year. Like there's going to be just more names that become available as these deals happen again. Like, and then so those are two teams we know that if they trade their superstars, Mitchell and Durant / Kyrie, those teams are going to be selling pieces off. But we also, whatever teams those guys get traded to, those rosters are going to be changing too. So I think, obviously, like we said, like you got to make some moves eventually because I think Caleb Martin is the guy they would like to keep. He's kind of the one name. You wrote about that on Monday, just kind of sitting in limbo, who I'm sure the Heat would love to have some resolution on whenever possible. But like you said, if we get to training camp and Kevin Durant is still on the Nets, if we get to November and Kevin Durant is still on the Nets, the offseason is over, but it's not really over because there's going to be a lot of movement.
Yeah. And I think the Heat are expecting that. And that's why they don't want to go. They don't want to face the hard cap. I think they expect a volatile trade market. And that was before. Maybe they already had, like you said, an inkling that Kevin Durant was going to become available, but that was before the Kevin Durant trade demand leaked and became public. So there are guys, again, Bradley Beal, Donovan Mitchell. We still don't know. I think Damian Lillard's staying in Portland, right?
Lillard.
But who knows?
You even look at some of the other bad teams around the league, depending on what, could Shai Gilgeous-Alexander ever become available? There's just other good players on bad teams that are in full rebuild mode, and eventually, who knows? You never know.
Yeah, you just don't know. 3 months ago, I would not have predicted Kevin Durant to become available after signing a 4-year extension. Like it's the NBA.
6 months ago, we would have been having this conversation about Karl Towns is a name we mentioned. Now he's just signed the giant deal, and Minnesota's gone all in. Like, you never know.
And that means so little these days, right? Like these extensions,
right?
Like
exactly.
Bradley Beal's extension, right? It's like, would you be surprised if he requested trade in 3 months, like 4 months, and because they started 1-11? No, I don't think I'd be like. It's just stars have a lot of power in today's NBA, and whether they have 1 year left in the deal, 3 years, or with Kevin Durant 4 years, like they can get out of situations if they really want to. And again, the Heat are trying to be in position to make a move for one of them, whoever it is. They're going to try to be in the game because they feel like just by adding, whether it's Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Donovan Mitchell, you add one of those guys while keeping Bam and Jimmy, you're one of the favorites to win the championship.
Yeah.
And the Heat knows that.
Yeah. The Gobert trade, I think, has probably thrown the market out of whack a little bit too, with the number of picks that Minnesota gave up to get Rudy Gobert, who I think people are skeptical about as a guy who can help you win at the highest level.
That's pretty much the most picks you can give up, like in a trade.
Basically,
like, people are saying, "Oh, double the picks and stuff." I guess you could by including more teams in the deal, right, for Kevin Durant. But you can only trade like picks 7 years into the future, right? So and you can only trade every other year.
Yeah,
4 picks and 3 swaps. Like that's the most you could do.
Yeah,
that's what the Timberwolves basically did for Rudy Gobert. Plus this year's first-round pick they drafted.
Right. Yeah, the guy they just
So there isn't much better you could do. Like Brooklyn might be expecting more because it's Kevin Durant, but there really isn't much more teams can offer as far as draft compensation.
Yeah, I mean, how many picks can the Heat give up? It's 2 basically.
It's right now they have 2 unprotected, but if they lift the protections on the 2025 pick, which I think they would be able to do if they need to, they can include 3 unprotected first-round picks in 23, 25, and like 28, I believe it was 3 picks, and then 3 pick swaps basically.
And then swaps.
Yeah.
And then if you wait 30 days, you could do the same thing and put Jovic in the deal. He just has to wait 30 days after he signs his rookie extension. So like that's gonna be the baseline, right? It's basically that, and then it's like, what can you give up Tyler here? Like, can you give up another? Obviously, if it's Jimmy or Bam, maybe the you don't need the same level of picks, because the Wolves didn't give up anyone who's that type of asset. But it's gonna be expensive for anyone to make a move, and part of that is gonna be like, if you wait it out and you get back, like just say it gets to the trade deadline, all of a sudden like there's more urgency, there's more that trade is further in the rear view where maybe people aren't like right now. If they trade Kevin Durant and they get back less than Rudy Gobert, everyone's gonna be like, oh my god, how did they like not get back that much? Like, but in 5 months at the trade deadline or whatever, we're going to be having it'll be a totally different conversation because things will have changed and all that. And again, it's not necessarily something the Nets should be concerned with. They should just be concerned with getting the best deal they can, or keeping Kevin and gambling that he's going to play hard, and they have Kevin Durant and Kyrie and Ben Simmons, and you can still be pretty good. But it's just the way teams think, and it's going to be like we said, a longer offseason, I think, than we anticipated, because I think it's going to go beyond the offseason before the Heat know what their roster is fully going to look like come playoff time next year.
Yeah, it could be. And you would be willing to deal all those picks for Kevin Durant. If the offer didn't include Bam or Jimmy, like you'd be willing to give up, basically mortgage your future just to go all in right now. You might be, the Heat kind of got burned with LeBron and Chris Bosh when they gave away all those picks that they didn't have picks for years, I felt like. And they'll do that. I guess they would do that again for Kevin Durant. Like, you would be willing to do it.
Yeah, well, and then, we're talking Donovan Mitchell will be the next name that comes up. Like, you don't think after Utah just got that huge cash of picks from Minnesota,
the price went up.
He gave them that offer, and I don't know, let's say they it required Tyler Hero or something, like, you don't think they would do that if the Heat came to them and were like, you get this full rebuild going right now. You've got a young star to build, like whatever you want to call Tyler Hero, whether he's a star or not. You got a young, really promising guy to build around. Even if they don't get Kevin Durant, the Heat are going to be sitting pretty, I think, for Donovan Mitchell, or like you said, Bradley Beal at some point, or Damian Lillard. Like these teams that should be thinking rebuild. I don't know if the Wizards are thinking rebuild because it's not a very well-run organization, but they're the Heat with those picks that are now available and a young guy like Tyler Hero. Like maybe that's not enough to get you Kevin Durant because he's one of the 12 best players of all time, but it's enough to get you a guy like Donovan Mitchell or whoever the next guy available is.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Heat, credit to them, like they weren't in a position to really go after guys like Bradley Beal and stuff a few years ago. I know we've had this conversation many times of like, would they have enough? Like they don't have enough to do a deal like that unless Bradley Beal just says he wants to be on the Heat. They don't have enough picks. They don't have the young asset. Now they do. Right?
Yeah.
Like
And it's
now
not
they
like they
have
wasted time, right? Like I think when they were struggling to put together a package like that, we were just like, all right, they're just gonna be like okay for the next whatever. But no, in that time that we've been waiting for them to build up their assets to take the huge swing, they have been to a finals and been to an Eastern Conference Finals.
Been like, 1 game away from the final. Right. They were in the finals 3 years ago and we're 1 game away from the finals this year. So yeah, I mean, again, I think Heat fans, like there's my message to them. If Kevin Durant does not come, don't panic. Like this is still a really good team. Yeah, they might have taken a step back right now, but all you can ask for is to be very good, right, which his team is, and also be at the same time in position to have enough to be in the conversation for the next star who becomes available. And the Heat checks both of those boxes. So I think you just got to be patient, see how this plays out, and then you move forward from there.
All right, let's wrap up quickly with some early summer league thoughts. Nikola Jovic, not a great start to summer league for him. I think like I said, you'll be out there for the Vegas summer league starting later on this week, right? Friday or Saturday, I think is the first game out in Vegas. So you'll get an up close look at Jovic. I think just the more he plays, the more comfortable he'll be, but not a very promising first 2 games, I guess.
Yeah, I guess some of it's to be expected, right? Like we can't have like these sky high. I know we did, like we were
for the
talking about
20,
last week.
Whatever pick he was, 27th pick.
27th pick, just turned 19 on like less than a month ago. Is coming over from Serbia. Like said before, his like after our summer league practice, like the biggest transition for him or biggest adjustment for him has been playing for a coach who doesn't speak Serbian. Like it's not just a 19-year-old, right? It's a 19-year-old coming to a totally different country, culture, like way of doing things. Like it's just different, and that's going to be hard for anybody. So we'll see. I mean, we have to give him time, but yeah, it's been a little bit of a rough start for him. I'm sure he's wanted to play better. He's had some moments, right? Like he had a step back mid-range jumper that was nice. You kind of saw some of the skill that the Heat are attracted to. There was like a one-handed hit ahead pass on a fast break. That was pretty impressive considering he's almost 7 feet tall. Took advantage of a switching defense and backed down a smaller defender and got an easy layup a couple times last game. So there's been moments, but for the most part, it's been a little rough. Defensively, biting on shot fakes, again, to be expected for a young player. But it's going to be, like we said, and what we expected, he's going to be a developmental player, right? Like he's not going to, he's going to need some time. He might even need to play in a G League a few games this year to kind of get some playing time. But we'll see. I mean, let's see when Omer Yurtseven gets here. The front court of Omer Yurtseven and Nikola Jovic, how that looks. And I would expect he'll be a little bit more comfortable as time goes on.
Yeah, I think if his name wasn't so similar to Nikola Jokic, people wouldn't be judging him on such a steep curve. But yeah, I think you can see again. I've really not watched the games, just seen the highlights. You can see like the skills that the Heat loved. I think like you mentioned the defense, and the jumper has not been good either. The 3-point shot. Those are the two things. You can still what we've seen so far is you see the ceiling that the Heat envision for him, right? When you have those type of offensive skills at that size, that handle, you mentioned some of the IQ stuff, knowing to back down a smaller guy, mid-range jump. Like he's got the stuff that are like those are the high ceiling tools, basically. The question was going to be, is he going to be good enough to play this, like contribute this year? Which, like you said, this is always developmental. It was going to be a bonus basically if he was going to be a good enough shooter and defender to give you 8 minutes a game in the playoffs or whatever. That doesn't seem like it's going to be the case right now. Obviously a long way to go. And, playoffs are almost a year away and full season in the G League and in the Heat development and maybe some NBA experience could go a long way in that kind of time, especially for a guy that young. But right now, I think the story is you see the ceiling, but he's a long, long way from it.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Again, like you said, there's a long ways to go, right? And he's just been in the Heat's developmental program for like a week, pretty much.
Yeah. Signed his
But
deal on
like 2 days ago,
Friday or
3 days
something.
ago,
Yeah,
something like
Saturday.
that. Saturday, yeah. But I think, this is whether he plays next year or not. Like he's a developmental guy, right? Like he might have flashes. He might have some games where when the Heat are injured, he needs to play 20 minutes and he hits a few threes. And you know how Twitter gets, like they'll be calling from to be in the rotation.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
The KZ days, when every one good game he had and people wanted him to start. I'm sure there'll be some of that. But I think for the most part, it's going to take time. And that's, again, to be expected for a guy who's 19 and got picked number 27 in the first round. So I don't think it's a surprise.
All right, I think we can wrap things up there. Like you said, Anthony will be in Vegas. You will be in Vegas probably when you record next week, right? Or will you be back by then?
No, I should still be there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we'll come back next week. We'll do. I'm sure there will be more free agency talk. Obviously, the Heat have to do something at some point.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. I guess. Look, something has to get settled with Caleb Martin. I think at some point, whether it's the Heat losing him or keeping him, that feels like it has to happen eventually. And then who knows? Maybe someone will demand a trade, and we'll have something new to talk about. But if not, we'll have plenty of summer league stuff to talk about. Real quick, anyone other than Nicola? I think a lot of people, holiday weekend, California Classic, people aren't locked in the same way they'll be locked in come Vegas Summer League. Maybe I'm just projecting here, but who are some of the guys that interested you other than Nikola Jovic on the Summer League roster from just watching those first two games?
I mean, Haywood Highsmith, I think, is an NBA player.
Yeah, he played in the playoffs.
Yeah, right, and he's played like relatively well in these first two games. Just solid, like nothing flashy. Like he's not not running your offense through him, but like he just makes good, smart plays. A good, versatile defender with a really long arms. Like he seems like a guy who could get minutes at forward this year if they really do just end up re-signing Caleb and really not making a big time addition. Like Haywood Highsmith could play off the bench. And last year, like when I spoke with him, he's like, yeah, they're trying to like do some develop me into kind of like another PJ Tucker, like really good defensively, good shooting threes. So maybe he helps fill that role. Yeah. But he's a guy that I think I've been impressed with just his development and a guy who looks like he's a real NBA player. And then another one, like among the undrafted guys, Kyle Allman Jr. One undrafted in 2019, I think out of Cal State Fullerton, has been playing overseas the past few years. He played in France last year, a guard. Good, very good, like quick first step, gets into the paint, he's played professionally for the last 3 years, so he has an advantage over some of these guys, but like knows what he's doing. Good playmaker, pretty good shooter. So he's been one guy that's popped early on in the first two games.
Yeah. Haywood Highsmith feels like he could be like the Max Strus of I don't know if he'll be as good as Max Strus, but just that Heat guy where like people are like, where the heck did this guy come from? But has been like kind of quietly developing in the background, whether it's at Summer League. So yeah, I think it's fair to assume that he's gonna get a real shot next year. And those guys, the Heat, the only like bust they've had of like a guy who they've tried to give young guy they've tried to give an expanded role to and it hasn't worked has been KZ. And that's because he was drafted, so you were gonna like give him a shot. But everyone else like seems like they know when to give these guys a chance. And Highsmith is kind of the next in line, just based on you saw like the minimal minutes last year, that kind of thing. So building up in the right direction.
And if you really, we might have a real big need at that spot.
Yeah, that too. He was a COVID find too, right? Wasn't he a guy they added?
He was.
Yeah.
He was one of the COVID
like him and Kyle Guy were like, and Mario Chalmers.
Yeah, Mario Chalmers, right? Yeah, there was Stauskas was another guy.
Got Stauskas in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess two other. I mean, obviously Omar Yurtseven will be there in Vegas. And then Marcus Garrett, who was on a 2-way contract for part of the season last year, impressed in Summer League last year, got it, obviously got the 2-way from Miami, was waived when they signed Kyle Guy in January, but had wrist surgery, was rehabbing for the last few months, and is expected to play in Vegas. So he's another guy to watch because
he clearly
skill set. Yeah, they like him. He has an intriguing skill set as an accomplished college player. So I think the summer league team will be better in Vegas because they're getting maybe two of their best players. Over there.
All right. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chiang. He'll be out in Vegas, owning the craps tables and writing some summer league stories too while he's out there.
We'll see if I have time. We'll see if I have time.
Yeah, we'll see how much you're winning. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. I've mostly been writing about Miami recruiting because I know Anthony is excited about the way things are looking right now.
I mean, when's the last time they got this amount of high caliber recruits?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
It's been a little bit. Like they had a few really good recruiting classes recently. I want to.
Yeah, well, the one where they got like the one last 2 years ago, whatever, with the James Williams and Leonard Taylor. That was like
Leonard Taylor,
Florida. The 18 class that did not pan out at all, but had like Mark Pope and that whole group. Lorenzo Lingard was the 5-star running back in that class.
Yeah.
A bunch of guys who didn't really pan out. But yeah, they haven't gotten an offensive lineman they haven't gotten a 5-star offensive lineman since Seantrell Henderson. So getting the one on Monday, Francis Maigoa, is it's a pretty big deal.
I don't know what it feels like to watch the Hurricanes with a good offensive line anymore. Like I don't know what that feels like. So that's going to be different if they actually have a really good offensive line in a couple of years.
All right. Thanks as always for listening, everyone, and we will talk to you next week.